What keeps miners awake during the night?
With AI being just possibly existing firms are not that reliant on the lowest power prices, but one of our historical focuses has been Bitcoin specifically, but we expanded the universe to, for instance, Ethereum as well.
The Bitcoin is coming to its final epoch.
We work together with mining pools to try to understand how mining is geographically distributed.
Gas flaring was a fascinating waste of energy for me when I learned about it in 2018. If Bitcoin price is going to keep going up and there's no incentive to mine, who's going to be left mining? Yeah, no, definitely. I have to look good because look at this guy. Alexander, you're looking great.
Oh, thanks, you as well.
No, appreciate it. Thank you for coming. So Alex Neumüller today in this studio, and we're going to talk about his big report that has been recently introduced to the public as Cambridge Digital Mining Industry Report, where he and a group of other researchers have done so much work on actually explaining how Bitcoin mining works, what is Bitcoin, and what is the energy consumption behind Bitcoin, and many, many more other things about Bitcoin mining. And I really appreciate that you found time to come to this podcast, to this studio. I'm glad to have you here.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invite and also your participation in our study. For the listeners, I'm Alexander Neumüller. I'm a kind of a research lead for the environmental and energy side for digital assets more broadly. But one of our historical focuses has been Bitcoin specifically. But we expanded the universe to, for instance, Ethereum as well. But the report is one of those kind of, I think, outputs that is specifically in that case concerned with the mining industry. And very excited to be here.
You know, I think I saw somewhere on Twitter somewhere people listened to your talk at the conference today. Not today, a couple of days ago.
Okay.
And they saw you wearing a suit. So today I see you in more comfortable suit.
Yes, indeed. I changed my attire after 2 days in a suit and tie. I thought, okay, today is more the, I would say, part where I'm reaching out to industry folks and just having good conversations. And also happy to not wear a suit for 1 day. So that is the reason why I'm looking like this now.
You know, you look like a real Bitcoiner now, because it's like that's how people dress up in Bitcoin industry. Even though you don't have that many followers on Twitter, on LinkedIn, but you're an important figure in Bitcoin. Why don't you tell the audience about yourself, who you are?
Yeah, sure. Happy to say a couple of words. So essentially, my journey started more in traditional finance, I think, as it has been for many people that came from TradFi. I came across Bitcoin actually quite some time ago. It was just that at that point, I was still a bit from the mindset more on the traditional side, right? I was also not, I would say, not too tech savvy. And it was a lot harder to get information about Bitcoin. But when I first came across Bitcoin, it was kind of interesting because from the university days, I was always a bit of drawn to specifically Austrian economics and these sort of topics. And ideologically, I thought this is kind of an interesting new technology. Long story short, I just observed it and continued to. And I was a miner at some point myself. So I started mining essentially in 2018.
Wow,
19.
early.
Yes. But it was in China. And I think we know what happened in 2021.
Yeah.
And this was also why I bring to my research this kind of practitioner perspective as well. And I had a long study journey. So I went to a couple of universities, finished essentially in Cambridge in 2021. So this was exactly coinciding with essentially the kind of very strong change in my business model at that time. And it was then for me the question of what I'm going to do. But I'm going back to TradFi. Do I look for something else? And the Center for Alternative Finance already had some great research in that regard. They started looking into already before. I think the first report was published in 2017 about the more broader blockchain ecosystem. But they started to then, I think, based on the public interest, simply look into some areas specifically like the electricity consumption at that point, And I saw the research and said, okay, I came from finance, so I knew a bit of my way around modeling as well, and had this kind of practitioner insights. And this is then in the end why kind of how this happened, that I started then to get engaged with the center. And yeah, I'm working there ever since.
Wow. Listen, I'm very happy to be able to talk to you on this podcast, honestly. There's so many people who know about Bitcoin, who talk about Bitcoin, and most of their knowledge comes from Twitter or X, right? And then it comes from conferences where they just talk to each other. So they make this type of a thought leadership without a research backed sometimes. And when I learned about a Bitcoin mining report that was released by Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance, I was very fascinated the first time. I think this is the second time you guys released it, right?
This is, we had some reports before, but they were not specifically about mining.
Right.
And yeah, this was one.
So when I actually learned about this one, the second one, it was so fascinating for me that educational community, research community is also paying attention, and we can finally have some, not Bitcoin voice only to talk about Bitcoin mining from, educational perspective, research perspective, from the perspective that hasn't been introduced to the industry yet, from a new perspective. And I got an opportunity to know a lot of researchers in my life. And I understand how hard it is to publish a paper. It's not as easy as just put a couple of tweets together. It requires a lot of work, and it requires a lot of research, conversations, and it requires a work of many people, not just one. So tell me, how many people worked on this report together with you?
So we were 4 co-authors essentially. I was kind of spearheading the project. And yeah, it was a strong collective effort to really try and create something that really contributes a lot of value, because what we saw is simply this bit of lack of data in the industry, right? And we see as kind of our position that we, I think, are very well suited to fill as this independent research institute acting as essentially data aggregator, where we have contact to many different stakeholders, and not just contact to the industry. We have a contact to regulatory community, to others, and where we can really function as this essentially medium, really, where we can collect data that you would otherwise, I think, very difficult to get, and then publish this data, and also the educational part. So I think for the first report, one of those things that for me personally was very important to include an educational element, so not just and thanks again also from your end for contributing to our
Absolutely.
participating.
Thank you for reaching out to us.
And it's not just important to collect this data and then publish the findings essentially, but for the first iteration at least, what we wanted to do is create something where we start essentially possibly at the first page, and by the end you end up at the last page, and you might have not had any sort of deep exposure to the space. You might have, you still learn about Bitcoin, you learn about mining more from a really general perspective, right? Very neutral perspective, I think. But it helps to, I guess, also we had some other thematic areas that we explored, for instance, from methane mitigation and these sort of aspects that we also not just publish the data, but also described a bit to really help the audience to kind of understand the overall topic. And yeah, we broached some new aspects as well. For instance, the increasingly relevant part of the the intersection between digital mining and AI. And yeah, it was a very, I think, an effort to this time educate and also publish data.
Yes, and that's very important, the education part. What fascinated me, actually, what is Bitcoin part in that report? Because you went so deep and so far in the history to actually explain people what Bitcoin is, what cryptography is. And you went to as early as 1970s. So can you bring up the audience a little bit back and give a glimpse of the what is Bitcoin from your perspective and where it's coming from?
Yeah, I think it's a culmination of, as you mentioned, a lot of research that has been done over decades, right? And this is, I think, the fascinating area where Bitcoin has been essentially solved an issue that allowed really creating this decentralized payment system when it was created. Right now, we talk about more as a store of value, but in the beginning, I think the idea was having this kind of decentralized payment system, censorship resistance. I think there's some specific aspects that also were very interesting to me, and what essentially brought me to Bitcoin as well. Just observing these things, but Bitcoin is fascinating. It has been, I think, started a huge ecosystem. Starting with Bitcoin, then you saw naturally other cryptocurrencies emerging. So it was really, I think, a starting point that made a huge impact on the entire society. I would say specifically we think about stable coins and these sort of things, right? That emerged. And yeah, it has, but it was really a kind of a culmination of a lot of research, and this has been conducted over many years. A lot of different projects as well. For instance, Hashcash and these sort of developments. And yeah, it's a fascinating area.
What surprised me in the report is that the Satoshi white paper was written after so many different things happened before. As you mentioned, 1970s, there's cryptography, and then there's different layers of spreading information, P2P payments. So those all ideas that have been coming out from other people were basically put in a couple-page document, and this new technology, uh, digital money, store of value, I would call Bitcoin a religion as well, came out, and um, more people are getting involved in it, and more people need more information. So I'm glad that Cambridge, how you call it again? Cambridge
Center for Alternative Finance.
Yeah, Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance actually spent time and put effort to put the digital mining report into life, honestly. But crypto community is very skeptical, and they're going to say, listen, we know everything ourselves more than anywhere else. We don't like those researchers, those educators, those experts. We don't like them. They told us during the pandemic that the pandemic going to go away. It didn't. We don't trust experts. So why should we, why should I, why should the industry uh, trust your thought? What is the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance?
So essentially, I think over the years, we have established ourselves as this kind of trusted independent source.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, why people also want to collaborate. It was naturally, it was an undertaking, right? To be honest, naturally, to convince all the community. I mean, we nearly managed to get a sample that represents 50% of network hash rate. So naturally, there was a lot of engagement needed to make sure that those who provide data are also comfortable with it. And I think with the report now, we have shown that our objective really is kind of, with the educational part, but then also the data publishing part without having essentially any sort of, I would say, strong opinion ourselves.
Right.
We really want to show, okay, we are a trusted data aggregator, people work with us, then we collect the data, we analyze the data, we publish the results, and the kind of communication around the findings can then happen, with industry stakeholders, with other stakeholders, with everyone having their own opinions, right? But it's not what we want to do. Where we really want to, and because if as soon as you take one side, right, then it becomes tricky.
It's a biased opinion right away.
Yeah. So we are trying really to publish information and being sure that any sort of decisions have an evidence basis, and making sure that everyone has the best data possible. That's kind of our objective.
And that's what inspires me, honestly. The real work product, like proof of work. That's what Bitcoin mining is based on, right? And what you guys did is put so much information, so much research in the language that is not only clear to any Bitcoiner, but to any person. So that report alone, it seems to me, can attract other users of Bitcoin, other users from the industry
Mm.
or outside the industry who've never seen what Bitcoin is. And that first section of the report is basically explaining where Bitcoin came from and why it's here. Because most people heard about Bitcoin as a means to pay for drugs,
Mm.
guns, a dark web, right? Well, you go further from there, and you say, guys, before Bitcoin actually became a means of tender or a money, there were other technologies behind it, and that's why we have it.
Yeah.
So why don't we go straight to the report? I read it all. It's absolutely,
nice.
yeah, absolutely. It's a good work. It
Great
took
to
me a
hear.
few hours, and it was fascinating to read a few structures. And I'll be honest with you that part about Bitcoin, what is Bitcoin, was actually the most fascinating part because everything else I understand.
Yeah.
I understand power. I understand electricity, hash rate, economics behind it, the business, but like the fundamental a part of it was not that deep in my knowledge, honestly. But you helped me, the person who's been in the industry for 8 years, to actually look at this from a different perspective. And I hope other people gonna have the same vision. So I definitely encourage all the users who are watching or listening to this podcast to make sure you download the report. The link to the report is going to be in description below on the YouTube, and we're going to add it into other platforms. But going to the report, there is a fascinating part because it covers a lot of miners, so it's close to my heart.
Mm.
And I want to ask you, after all research you've done, after all work you've put into this, what keeps miners awake during the night?
Yeah, I think it's mostly power, right? Power prices, access to power, specifically now with, I would say, quite a demanding competitor, AI. And with AI being just possibly existing firms are not that reliant on the lowest power prices, right? Naturally, power for them is also super important. But that was one of those things that I think we saw. We also had essentially unfavorable governmental action as one of these points, which I think is understandable, right? We not so much in the US, but even in the US, you had at some point discussions about at that point it was called Dame tax, where this would have impacted the business models, right? But naturally, China was, I think, one of the really kind of big shifts. But we see also other shifts in countries where possibly it has not been regulated, but then suddenly, imagine you build your business there and it gets banned. I mean, I experienced this myself. So
right, you're a miner. You
yeah, and suddenly, entire business model is invalid because from 1 week to the next, you're just not allowed to do what you have done before. So I can understand that naturally large miners are often geographically diversified. So that was also one of the points we found as a risk management tool. But yeah, that was one of those areas as well. We see even in Russia, we started power restrictions in, I think, southern Siberia. So there is definitely kind of the concern that at some point something happens that materially impacts your business model. And lastly was Bitcoin price, right?
Yes, something we can't control.
Yeah.
Everything else we can. Bitcoin price we cannot.
Yeah, and I mean, it might become for some companies, you have equipment which is essentially to some extent tied to the Bitcoin price, right? Then your product is Bitcoin, and some companies have large holdings of Bitcoin as well. So naturally, that is also one of the, I guess, key concerns that any adverse development might also have some implications.
So, Alex, power has been always an issue. I think right from the beginning, the people were saying that Bitcoin mining is wasting energy, that this is the like crazy way to use energy, that it's polluting the environment, it's going to actually heat up the oceans. And yet, after reading your report, I can see that it's 52%, over 52% of crypto mining is utilizing renewable energy. So how is it possible that we had so much negative coverage of Bitcoin mining, and yet the real research, the real work, uh, tells us otherwise? Do you think it was a little bit of bias, opinion, media opinion to try to kill Bitcoin mining industry?
I think things has changed over time in the sense that when we started first looking into this, we worked together with mining pools to try to understand how mining is geographically distributed. And if you have that kind of understanding, you can derive, for instance, like about how Bitcoin is powered. Essentially, we call it a location-based assessment. And at that point, we still had a lot of mining in China, and then you had these migrations, right? At some point, we actually managed to capture these migrations, but naturally, kind of the geographical distribution a couple of years ago was just, I think, influencing the overall energy mix. But since kind of the broader relocation took place, then we saw a lot of increase in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, in terms of is also quite a large share of fossil fuels. So now I think what we saw is we see a kind of considerable activity also in South America. We see activity emerging in Africa. We see, there is continued activity in Northern Europe. The US is kind of had solidified its position as the main kind of mining hub. I think this kind of current geographical development that we are seeing definitely influences kind of the energy mix overall, specifically if you look in Africa, right, whether it's Ethiopia, Congo, or other regions, it's pretty much kind of hydropower. So, and I think we see some very interesting companies that try to, work with rural communities there, find some excess supply, and really, might even benefit the entire community. So there's a lot of interesting things. But I think this was, to some extent, the energy mix has changed now simply over time, and given that many countries that had more this kind of larger fossil fuel base as part of their electricity mix simply do not boast, I think, that much mining activity anymore.
Yeah, look, when I started Bitcoin mining, and it was in 2018, and then going forward, we built a business around it. We always were looking for cheaper power, and what we learned that the cheapest power is renewable power. Um, you can go and to Texas, for example, where there's a lot of solar power and wind power, and you can actually benefit from that because there is so much power available during the night and no one is using it, so it's cheaper than hydropower. I think one of my first trips in search of hydropower was into Washington State. The town was called Wenatchee. It's when every crypto mining was happening, right in 2017. I think end of 2016, 2017. That's when China was, I think, either thinking to ban mining. It was starting kind of become the news.
It was a process, yes.
It was a process. And when we came there, when I actually traveled to Wenatchee, and there is, I think it's Columbia River, and they had so much power, hydropower, which was in excess, and no one was using it. A lot of companies from China actually were already establishing crypto mining farms there at that time. And power, as far as I remember, was going at 3.2 cents per kW, all in price. It was the cheapest power. But when I came there, nothing was available. So it's natural for crypto miners actually looking for cheaper power. And according to your report, only 8.9% is coal power. So coal power is already by design is not very cheap for crypto miners. That's why they're not going there. And my concern was that we had to fight this narrative that a Bitcoin mining is like killing the environment for such a long time, even though I knew that by design, I would be looking for a cheaper sources of power. I would be going to the areas where there is less power. I mean, more power, but for cheaper price. Then let's talk about gas flaring, for example. And I think you touched it in your report, and you definitely, if you guys haven't read it, you definitely have to read the report. Gas flaring was a fascinating waste of energy for me when I learned about it in 2018. And I think Easy Blockchain was one of the first companies who started pursuing the idea to monetize natural gas, flare gas, and convert it into energy, and then to convert into cryptocurrency, obviously. According to your research, do you see gas flaring as a problem to be resolved by crypto miners at all?
I think gas flaring is a huge global problem. There is even a World Bank initiative that tries to eliminate basically zero routine flaring initiative, and I think it's absolutely, frankly, you really need to have some sort of demand, right? That's kind of the point where you flare because venting would be utmost horrible. Like
Right.
this is the worst, one of the worst things you can do. So you just essentially burn the gas in the flare stack, and it's, as you said, kind of economically just wasted because it doesn't help anyone. It's just the only purpose is that it's not being vented. So if you find any sort of if there are pipelines already existing, so we might not have this problem at all in general. But if there is just no demand on site and any sort of other activity might not be, for instance, we talk about like hydrogen production and these sort of things. These are huge capex, like heavy undertakings. And when we think about mining, is quite. I think it's a way in a very at a very reasonable capex, and you have this granularity and flexibility simply where you essentially use a gas engine, put the commute infrastructure directly kind of adjacent to it, and it's you don't need any fiber. You have your Starlink, or you use those sort of. So you can just collocate to some upstream oil and gas producer that has this problem. I think they are also happy if someone helps them in that regard. So it can be. I think it's not the only solution, frankly, but I think it's one tool that we see also increasingly used, right? Also, and I think the findings in our report were quite interesting to see the extent to which this is already happening. And I think we were about 500 megawatts, like globally.
That's crazy. That's a big number.
Yeah.
Wasn't it like 5% of mining or something like that? Or no? I think around that number. I don't want to get you on spot here. When flare gas actually became into my radar, I was calling all these oil and gas companies. I was saying, "Hey guys, I'm going to help you. I'm going to bring Bitcoin mining into the field, and we're going to solve your flaring problem." At first, everyone was laughing. They're like, "Nah, you're not going to do anything. This is crazy idea. What is Bitcoin? What is that thing? What are you going to do? Tell us again." But then when we actually started deploying some units, guys were fascinated. And I mean, oil and gas companies, they were fascinated that there is actually a solution. And what inspires me that more and more companies started getting into this. They quickly realized that this is a very hard business to be in. But another thing I realized, when I looked into getting flare gas problem to be solved with Bitcoin mining, I figured that not many people actually care about that problem at all. The only people who care about that problem were oil and gas companies because they were not allowed to drill more gas or more oil. And when we actually started talking to local communities, to governmental institutions, bring up a solution, say, "Hey, the solution is here. Bitcoin mining can help you with flared gas." We basically were kind of laughed at. They were saying, "Well, but generators produce emissions. It's not a good solution." Well, and I was like, "Well, it's better to have generators producing some economical output and maybe emissions than just burning this thing into the air." And that was very demotivating. And I can see that, like any other company who's going to come up with some technology or pseudo technology to resolve an environmental problem, they're going to keep raising money for this. They're going to receive grants. Bitcoin miners, nothing. As I usually say, we succeed on our own and we fail on our own. It was our idea to get, in solution of this problem. And this idea didn't got any traction from the government. Because if it was any other technology, I'm sure it would.
Yes, I mean, I can't perfectly answer that question. What would have happened? I think depending on the current government, they have different priorities. Possibly now it changed a bit, specifically in the US. This is, I hope, where our report can help inform a bit to, okay, what is actually Bitcoin, right? So that, a general audience can get I would say, concise overview. So they might say, well, okay, now we have an idea of what we're actually talking about. But I can imagine might be quite tricky to specifically convince a very traditional industry to say, hey, well, now there's this new thing. And then they might have, you read the news, right? And then, possibly some negative comments around, as you said in the beginning, Silk Road and these sort of things.
Yes.
And naturally that might be from a risk perspective. If you are a large company, like, a large oil company, there is some reputational risk that you say, well, it's a problem, and it could be helpful, but kind of the reputational risk might just be not worth it, frankly,
Yeah.
to get involved here. But yeah, I think this was possibly more because I would assume that this is now changing.
It's definitely changing because Bitcoin mining is changing and the whole industry is changing, right? Look, we're here with you at this conference, and we have only, I think, around 30,000 people who came here. We have politicians, we have Vice President of the United States showing up. So it's a very different thing than it used to be. I don't know any other industries where politicians of this level are gonna just attend and do a keynote speech. And our industry was able to come out of the bushes and actually take over the media space and take over. I'll be honest, with the hearts of the politicians as well. And that's good news. But it's not enough to take it's not enough to take over hearts of a few people. We have to take over hearts of more people. And I guess what I want to talk about is that your report seems like has been covered by multiple traditional media. I think I saw it on Fox News somewhere and somewhere else. And that was very exciting for me because it seems to me that reports of this level, with the researched research information, with reputable names around it, they open up like ears and eyes of like common people who just watch news, people who have no idea about Bitcoin, people who just live their lives. They are not Bitcoiners. And you found the way to translate the Bitcoin language into normal language. Do you think that was an intent?
Yeah, the intent was kind of the educational part, right? So it was really the intent to specifically, as you said, make the language user friendly in a way where you try to avoid jargons. Really start at the beginning and then try to gradually let the reader build up knowledge, and then so that they can more appreciate subsequent sections, right? So um, I would say definitely an intent was to create something that is suitable for a general audience, right? Because if we would have written something specifically if you write something specifically for an industry, you might write very differently. And you might have skipped the entire introduction at all, right? Because people are generally, know these things, specifically the mining community, the mining chapter.
Yeah.
But I think for a general audience, what do these machines actually do? I think that's one of the...
What are we excited about here, right?
Yeah. And trying to translate this. So why not? So and then the question, like, why don't you use GPUs or some other kind of hardware? Why you have these special devices that can essentially fulfill only one purpose in the computational sense? Naturally, possibly talk about this later, where you can then you reutilize the heat, which we see a lot more, I think, occurring now. Where it's a fascinating area, frankly. And
what attracted my attention in the report was you explaining that utilizing Bitcoin proof of work consensus is a security function. Can you talk more about it?
Yeah, essentially, the execution of a 51% attack gets more and more difficult. The more kind of computational power is, you have essentially the difficulty increases. You have the difficulty adjustments, and if someone wants to, for instance, be a root and then say, well, we try to in the shadow mine, a second chain and want to double spend. And I think for Bitcoin, we very well be beyond that point. I don't think there is this is a kind of a risk anymore. But ultimately, still, it's not the only security feature, right? But I think it's a key security feature, having more hash rate, making sure that any sort of single entity or group of entities cannot, for instance, attack the network via a 51% attack.
It's a different perspective, because if you're going to look at this from that angle, right, you can say, well, the amount of money we spend is for security. Then you can compare it to a banking system. How much money do we spend for a banking system? Then you can compare it, like, to storage of gold. How much money is spent for gold storage? And basically now it opens up so many different industries we can start comparing it to. Because if you just look at this as a pure conversion of electrons into money, I think the use case is not very strong. It's very hard to argue with other people. Like, for example, I mean, XRP, Ripple have funded the campaign against Bitcoin, I think a couple of years ago, because they were saying that Bitcoin shouldn't be using so much energy. It's a waste of energy completely. There are other cryptocurrencies that are just better than Bitcoin. Why are we using so much energy? But then if you flip the coin and you say, well, but this is a security feature, it's not a waste of energy. And in addition to that security feature, 50+% of that energy is renewable. And there are actual additional features that Bitcoin mining helps to balance the energy. It helps to finish, it helps to resolve a flaring problem. So now the benefits, there are more benefits than downsides of this. Don't you think?
I think there were a lot of points here. A lot of points I want to answer here. I think one of the key we talk about a very different security architecture. Right? We have in Bitcoin this strong connection to the physical world. Right? You need to have energy. You need to have the infrastructure. You need to have you need to have the hardware. There's a lot of components that make an attack quite difficult, because if you would reasonably want to try to attack the network, you would need to amass an immense amount of power, an immense amount of hardware, and most likely by the time when someone tries to do this, people will realize, because someone is buying all the hardware, taking over firms. Right. So there is this I think strong this strong connection to the real world, which in itself is, I think, a very strong security feature. And in terms of, I think it's about USP. Frankly, I don't think that proof of work in Bitcoin, it seems to be key part of Bitcoin's USP. But when we think,
what do you refer to USP? What do you mean?
It's the unique selling point, right? Yes. So basically, what brings people to Bitcoin and what makes Bitcoin attractive. And if you look at the community, I think if we would have a Bitcoin proof of stake, I don't think people would be super happy. So
that's an interesting argument, by the way, about proof of stake. A lot of people in Ethereum were not happy about them moving to proof of stake, and yet Ethereum still grows as a network.
Yeah, I mean, you had the hard fork, right? Those people who didn't like it just continued with Ethereum Classic. So, I mean, I'm 100% sure that if Bitcoin would do this, I think there is actually a Bitcoin proof of stake. It's just no one is using it. And you would most likely surely have the same kind of path, right? We saw many forks in Bitcoin as well over time, with entire block size war coming up about block sizes. And if there are, and I think this is the beauty of this ecosystem, if there are disagreements, people are essentially free to follow what they believe in, whether that's in one direction or the other. So it's I think one of the very, very exciting things about this industry as well.
So, Alex, it seems like the Bitcoin is coming to its final epoch. It's like, it's coming to an end as a settling industry. I think we already went through this denial stage. We went through acceptance stage. I think we're going through the stage of a growth. But what's the next stage? I mean, the vision of Bitcoin was peer-to-peer money, digital cash. Now we can see that the price keeps going up. We see that people say, never sell your Bitcoin. Michael Saylor, the biggest PR agent of Bitcoin, says it's going to be $15 million, $13 million. We're going to have halving in 3 years, and then again halving, and again halving. Will we be in the stage where Bitcoin will become what it was envisioned to be, the money?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very difficult question to answer, right? It's more kind of a philosophical debate. I think,
Well, that's what we're here for, to
yeah,
debate.
yes. I think, you know, uh, the Bitcoin as this digital gold narrative or this store of value is, I guess, now kind of most commonly used. So if you look more into Bitcoin application as a kind of a cash, kind of a digital cash based system, I think those who followed that route are now with Bitcoin Cash, right, and some with BSV. So I think what we know now as Bitcoin is, I would say, mostly those people who see Bitcoin possibly as this kind of store of, digital kind of gold store of value, where transactions are possibly not at the top of the priority. You have, limited block size, but you can solve this with off-chain solutions, for instance, like Lightning Network. But it is a bit of a contradiction, right? And I can't say it's right or wrong. Who am I? I have my personal opinion.
Yeah,
right?
what is your personal opinion? Like, I know there's one part that you, what the report was put together, but I'm sure that, like, as you mentioned, you can be biased by putting together the reports. Like, it's all purely research based and data driven. But you definitely have your own opinions. So, what would that be? Like, where are we Where are we going with that? I asked that question. I'm genuinely interested because I asked that question myself, and I can't give an answer. That's why I want to probably have my opinion a little bit, diverged.
Yes. So, I mean, I do think, before I mentioned this kind of USP, so what makes kind of Bitcoin attractive overall,
Right.
and given that I do believe there is a lot of kind of room for other networks as well. So I'm not like a Bitcoin purist by no means. It's just that personally, I think there are most likely, if we talk about payment systems, there are other kind of more efficient ways than Bitcoin to do this. Bitcoin really has this kind of store of value. Really, that has essentially it's about everything is about trust, right? Because ultimately, you need to believe in Bitcoin, right? If this is how people are buying Bitcoin and making the value appreciate, because ultimately it's an internet token, right? That's like many other things as well. So kind of collectively, society decides the worth of certain goods,
Right.
and I think in Bitcoin, the overall understanding is simply kind of this store of value narrative where you have this kind of digital scarcity, and yeah, this is another topic because we touched briefly on mining economics as well. So I think we will see, and there will be some very intense but interesting debates, specifically as we move from one halving to the next, right? Specifically when we talk about security, when we talk about mining. I think there will be a lot of debates, but I don't want to open that box of the Pandora.
We definitely have to open it. Like,
Okay.
my company is involved in mining, and as you mentioned, like, there are so many different things we have to pay attention to. But one of the most important part that I'm paying attention to right now, what's mining going to look like in 3 years after next halving?
I think it will change, right? We are already seeing a lot of mining companies like yourself exploring just much more effective way to harness energy more effectively.
So you
And
mean like pivoting to other industries like AI data centers or just more efficient equipment?
no, but what I mean is specifically, for instance, utilizing otherwise flared gas, utilizing excess supply in regions where, for instance,
So
there's
making
extra
Bitcoin
power.
mining as a tool for something else, right?
That is more kind of, I think, when we talk about that. This is, I think, there are multiple components. But first, kind of harnessing energy more effectively. This also means, for instance, instead of just, if you use air cooling, just blowing out in the air the heat, right? Trying to find use cases for those heat. When I was at the Bitmain conference, I think Bengang Yok got a great presentation of what Bitfarm is doing with using drying woods and these sort of things.
Right.
And then they give examples of you can dry fruits, and naturally, if you use, I think, a bit more sophisticated systems, you see pilots of, for instance, Mera in Finland, where they actually supply district heating, where you really essentially what you do, you convert electric power to heat. And before, heat was kind of a problem, but now it is, I guess, increasingly seen as an opportunity. And I think we see this this is more on the energy side. We see these kind of developments where energy is just harnessed more effectively. To your point about AI, there's a lot of other things to unravel as well. Well, for instance, when we see now many firms, really trying or really getting into the AI space, building the infrastructure, and but naturally it's a very different business model.
Exactly.
And here mining could, for instance, help to balance out different utilization rates when it comes to AI inferencing, for instance, where your load profile is highly variable depending on the utilization of, for instance, the demand for AI compute. And here, when you have this, I guess, conversations with a utility company, and if you request large variable load, and it might become more and more difficult conversation as more of this kind of AI. There was a study by McKinsey. They estimate that just AI-related workload until 2030 will be 3.5 times of kind of the current power demand. And if you have this kind of huge increase in power demand, but you have this variability in, for instance, how power is then essentially consumed, here you can kind of demonstrate a much more to your utility, a much more predictable load if you say, hey, well, actually we take on this balancing function by time when there are low utilization rates, we're gonna ramp up our Bitcoin activity. And as the demand for AI compute goes up, we just ramp down, and you can do it very granular and you're super flexible. And then you can kind of really demonstrate this very, I would say, steady load profile. And I guess your utility will appreciate that if you take on, because otherwise they need to take on this function. So,
well, you see, all the answers you're giving, which are great, by the way. What they are telling me is that the Bitcoin mining is still going to be in survival stage all the time. We always have to innovate. So it's not just simply taking a machine, put it online, turn it on, and I'm supporting the network. It's showing me that we always have to find the ways to optimize, cut cost, be more efficient. Is it energy? Is it operation? Is it whatever? But we have to be more efficient. And we have to find different ways to monetize mining. Is it heat? It's selling heat. Maybe it's just heating the pools or the dry the fruits, as you mentioned, right? Because otherwise, it's going to be practically impossible, and Bitcoin mining will be moving out from Western jurisdictions, such as Europe and America, and it's just going to go to places where the energy is very cheap, but the political environment is not very friendly. Like for example, there has been a lot of mining happening in Iran because the energy is cheap, but Iran is not very, as far as I know, very happy with the Western civilization in general. So we need to make sure that we avoid that happening. Who would like the infrastructure that backs money of the world, such as Bitcoin, moving out of America or Europe, because Europe doesn't really have a lot of money anymore, as far as I know. And that's the kind of fundamental issue we're going to have to be fighting with. That we have to innovate. Otherwise, it's just not going to be possible to be able to support the network. And on the other hand, if just Bitcoin price is going to keep going up, then why should we mine? You just should buy Bitcoin and just hold it and do nothing and be like Micro Sailor. But then the question is going to be, and this is a question to you, if Bitcoin price is going to keep going up and there's no incentive to mine, who's going to be left mining?
Yeah, that's the big question, right?
You've done more research than I did, Alex.
Yeah, but the point is really, I think we are not at that stage, and it's very hard to tell, because ultimately, I don't think that if mining activity decreases substantially, there will be an increase in Bitcoin price, because simply it's a security concern. And I think those two there must always be a kind of an incentive for those who kind of secure the network to secure the network. Because if the sentence is not there, security is going to drop, and that will most likely also lead in a drop in price, right? Because those two things are very related. And that will be a very big question. I actually I have not done deep research on this, but I'm very interested in looking, at the incentive structure for mining, like 30, 20, 30, 40 years, when we really arrive at the block subsidy that is 0.00, for instance. And then, you have transaction fees, right? But what we're currently seeing is we have already empty blocks and then, very, very low fee rates. I think currently we have somewhere between 1 and 2 sets per rebyte. So I can't tell you exactly what happened, but I would assume that at some point there will be conversations about how to make sure that those who cannot secure the network are incentivized to do so, because otherwise it will have a price impact.
I completely agree with you. Alex, I have one more question I really want to ask you. What fascinated you mostly while doing this report? Did you learn something new that you didn't know before, and that was the fascinating thing for you?
Yes, absolutely. So I think there were a lot of things that you might have heard or you might have read briefly about, but this kind of study allowed me personally to delve a bit deeper, because you also had to think, how can you, for instance, use some, I would say, more technical paper or more technical information, and how do you kind of make this accessible to a general audience? Because that required to go deeper into many of these areas. For instance, when we talk about DSR or specifically, flare mitigation and these sort of areas, where I do think also the heat part, right, and also the economic side. So there were some, I think, interesting examples also about AI, specifically related to capex versus AI versus Bitcoin AI, including GPUs or just the infrastructure essentially. So there were a lot of interesting areas, I think, that where I did personally learn a lot, that I might have just seen somewhere or just briefly read about, like an article on Twitter, for instance, or X now. And then, you see, oh, this is kind of interesting. And then you start actually going down the rabbit hole and then trying to translate your findings in a way that is just accessible to the regular audience.
Alex, thank you very much for going into the rabbit hole and do it for everyone in the industry. I appreciate your hard work. Thank you. And thank you for coming.
Thanks a lot for inviting me. Really appreciate it. And again, thanks a lot for your contribution. And what can I say one more thing on a personal matter? If you are a miner, please, we would be utterly grateful for you to contribute to our work. As you have seen and hopefully look into the report. What we're really trying to do is help the public, help everyone to understand the industry and get the best data possible. And it's otherwise we will always be reliant on some theoretical modeling. And what we I think are now in a very, very unique position and in great position is to really bridge the gap between theory and practice. A link to the registration form will be in the report. So I hope you will sign up, and thank you very much.
Alex, where people can find you? In social media, website, LinkedIn, anywhere? Yeah,
LinkedIn is my, I think, main tool. I'm on X as well, but as you have said before, I look more like a fake profile with my 100 followers.
We need more of you on X. We need more of you.
And on X as well, that's I think pretty much it.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.